Story 1. Not my daughter, but my sister came home from college for Thanksgiving with a new boyfriend and his dog, an animal so skittish that it would not let anyone touch it other than the owner. When he called the dog, it would literally crawl on the floor towards him, obviously terrified that it was going to be beaten. Before the day was out, the dog had stolen a scrap of food, it was emaciated, and was promptly taken to the workshop's garage, former farm, where you could hear the man beating the dog senseless. When he returned to where we were standing around the grill, my father calmly told him to get in his car and leave or he'd be spending the night in jail. The dog was taken to the vet and presumably the shelter after that, and I had to drive my sister home. Personally, I think my father should have called the police and had him arrested. Story 2. In high school, I was someone's dad's least favorite boyfriend. My girlfriend had very strict parents who didn't allow her to date, so we had to sneak around them to see each other. Her parents used to leave the house on Saturdays for a long time to run errands, so we would hang out at her place most weekends. One Saturday, we were in bed and we heard the front door open and her dad come home. I was up like a shot and got my clothes on, then hid behind the door. Her dad came in to say hi to her and stood in the doorway making small talk for over 20 minutes, with me holding my breath only 3 feet away from where he stood. When he finally left to go to his room, I snuck out and bolted for the door. And that's when I realized I was screwed. My shoes weren't where I left them. In fact, they were nowhere to be found. I was terrified of her father, and it was a nice day out, so I did the only reasonable thing and I just got out of there. Walked the full hour home barefoot. She told me at school on Monday that he had seen my shoes as soon as he came home and had hidden them before coming to check on her. Sneaky bastard knew I was in there the whole time but didn't say anything. She was in so much trouble that we had to stop seeing each other after that. Story 3. Back in high school, my sister had a younger boyfriend who I can best describe as a douche nozzle. I remember once he was being his usual a-hole self, annoying my sister who was hanging out with me and my girlfriend in my room. She kept asking him to leave her alone and go home, but of course he wouldn't. I spoke up and said, "Dude, she doesn't want you here, it's our house, go home." He takes this as a personal challenge and stands up and gets in my face, yelling at me and trying to start a fight. I don't remember everything either of us said, but I do remember him telling me to hit him. I imagine it's because he was too much of a prick to start a fight with me in my house, but figured he could fight back. I just told him to shut up and go get your butt in the damn car. My dad drove him home and he tattled on me by telling my dad I cussed at him. My dad said he told him, "Good, when you're asked to leave, leave." I am happy he stood up for his sister. And I'm sure my dad had some other words for him as well. They didn't date for much longer afterwards. Story 4. My stepsister was a serial dater in high school. Seriously, every month or so there'd be a new boyfriend. Dad got tired of becoming emotionally attached to each new guy before the breakup, so he started calling them all Jimmy. They could have their own name if they lasted 2 months or if he hung around enough to make Dad actually like them. One guy's name actually was Jimmy, so Dad called him Tacklebox due to the excessive amount of facial and ear piercings the guy had. We kept track of who was who by adding hyphens to the front of them. There was Army Jimmy, who my sister dumped because he was becoming verbally abusive and talked about how she was lucky he didn't hit girls. NASCAR Jimmy, who was dismissive of my sister's interest, talked down to her, and apparently just kept her around because she was pretty and he could keep pressuring her for sex. A Jimmy who I can't remember their hyphen, but I know he and my sister got in a shouting argument in our driveway, and he drove off in a huff, never to be seen again. A couple of other Jimmys whose faces I remember, but didn't stick out in any particular way. A couple of them I think showed up at the house once, but never again. Tacklebox, aka actually named Jimmy, was the sweetest of them. Dad, who hates facial piercings, admitted he was the favorite so far because it was very nice. When he visited, he'd help clean up after dinner, and when they'd take walks around the backyard, my sister would come back with a wildflower in her hair and really happy smiles. They broke up because he was going off to college and they didn't want a long distance relationship. And Neo Jimmy, who we couldn't decide a nickname for, who eventually got his real name, ended up marrying my sister because he's a cool dude and they legit fell in love. I'm happy for her, and her new self esteem. Story 5. I dated a guy for 5 years before he broke up with me because he didn't love me anymore. We decided to give it another shot a couple of weeks later, but whenever he would come over, my dad would go to his and my mom's room and shut the door so he wouldn't have to see or talk to my boyfriend. About a month later, we broke up again. For me, it was for good, but my ex wanted to try again just like the time before. After I ignored all of his attempts at communicating, he came by the house. My dad came to my room to ask what the hell he was doing here. I told my dad I was ignoring him and that he would go away eventually. My dad just smiled and walked out of my room. I look at my bedroom window and I see my dad storming across the front yard, waving his arms and screaming at my ex who had just gotten out of his car. I'm not sure what all was said, but that was the last time I saw or heard from my ex. My mom later gave me the rundown of what my dad had screamed at my ex about. Basically, my dad had told him that if he couldn't treat me like the most important thing on earth, then he could piss off. Story 6. This happened to one of my aunts when she was a teenager, and my grandfather was the father in question. This happened in the early mid 60s, and my aunt's boyfriend was a bit of a Jack the Lad type, and as the story went, he slept my aunt over something minor. My grandfather never swore, never raised his voice, and had a Mr. Rogers esque personality. Getting him riled up was very difficult, and until his death, this was the only time my mum, any of my aunts, or my grandmother heard him yell. He ran over to the boy, who was stupid enough to hit someone in plain view, grabbed him by the ear, and marched him to the door while yelling, "How dare you raise a hand to a woman, sir? I ought to have you horsewhipped," and then threw him out of the door where the boy fell on his ass. That was the last time my aunt saw that boy, and no one ever heard Granddad yell again. Story 7. Years ago, I was home for college, and my little sister was a high school senior and had a date with a new boy. Evidently, he had recently dropped out of high school. He came in together and he chatted with my mom a few minutes. I walked into the room and chatted with him. Instantly did not like him. I don't remember why. He wanted to shake my hand. I refused, walked into the kitchen. My sister stormed in wanting to know what that was all about. I told her I did not trust him and didn't think she should go out with him. She went anyway. They drove in his pickup with no seat belts. Strike one. Our dad had been recently killed in an accident. She asked him what the refrigerator was for in the back of the truck. He was taking it to wherever he lived. He had just stolen it from a new development nearby. Strike two. Sister thought about it and asked him to take her home. He refused. Strike three. At the next stop sign, she opened the door, said goodbye, and got out. She walked to a gas station and called me to come get her. He drove away and later was chased by the police, don't remember why, on the interstate in Charlotte, and speeding trying to lose the cops while the refrigerator rolled around in the back of the truck. He went off the road, hit a tree, and was killed. Story 8. Not the father, but the boyfriend. I, 16 at the time, hooked up with his daughter, also 16, at an overnight Halloween party where there weren't supposed to be guys. Needless to say, there were. We did it in a laundry room, was weird, but it was fun, and yes, we used protection. Anyways, we decide to start dating, but neither of us wants to deal with the family drama. Her family is strict AF, and mine are just weird, so we keep it on a down low. Just hang out at school and meet up after without letting it slip. Well, sometime later, her father figures out what happened at the Halloween party and that we've had an ongoing physical relationship for a while now. She tells me he wants to meet me, and I'm like, hell no. No offense to her, but the whole avoid each other's families thing was working great. Once Daryl dad hears this, he apparently gets violent and tells her that I can come to him or he can come to me. She tells me this at school, and I'm just like, oh no. Next thing I know, this a-hole is showing up at my home and yelling at my parents that I took advantage of his daughter, literally outside of my house when I drove home from school. Since I handled confrontation poorly, I turned off my phone and drove away. Got something to eat, cruised through Walmart, went to the movies, and then drove home. My parents are chill, they didn't worry about me, they knew that I'll be back. They tell me this guy wants me brought up for charges for physically assaulting his daughter and victimizing her over the course of the couple of months we were together. I lay out the truth for them and yada yada. We decide to just see where this goes because at the time we figured it was a hollow threat. Nope. Next day in school, I'm called up to the office where the school officer is waiting with the principal and say that the father actually filed a police report. Then they had a chat with the daughter, who explained that her father was lying, and now they're chatting with me because they want the whole story. Everything gets said, and they send me away. After that, everything just sort of vanishes. Guess the guy calmed down and buggered off. Aftermath is we stopped seeing each other, which sucked because I really liked her. And when other people found out, I received a few odd looks in the hallway. Years later, in college, we got in contact through Facebook, and she told me her dad still despised me and often used my name in arguments over her dating habits. So, I was probably the worst boyfriend his daughter ever had. Did you ever have to deal with a terrible boyfriend? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.